Hey there. So I am going to be sharing with you how to use this cost of goods system so that you can share and figure out what your cost of your recipes are, keep track of the goods that you're purchasing and if and when they're increasing and decreasing in price, and that should change your recipes. So you can always be up to date of what each cost of each item you sell is. So the first thing we're going to go over is the cost of goods raw data. So this is an Excel sheet, and this is where you're going to log all of your goods. So if you buy from Costco or the grocery store online, you're going to log all this there with the cost and the amount or the quantity that you purchase it in. From there, I'm then going to talk about the recipe costing for each individual recipe. So show you a couple different templates. I have a baked good template that you can use if you're doing breads primarily or other pastry where you're using baker's percentages. And then there's also a recipe and costing template for non-baker's percentage things like spreads or whatever else you're making. Then there's like a sheet where we can log all this together, and that's the profit margin sheet. That is going to be kind of this grand master sheet where you can have all of your goods, know what the cost of each of them is, and what your charge is, then calculate profit margin. You can even catalog SKUs, which I like to do in that sheet, and then also a contractor pay calculator if you're not using an online system yet. So first we'll start with the cost of goods raw data. So that is this Excel sheet. This sheet has a place where you can enter each ingredient, the brand if you wish, place of purchase. You can even add links by doing Control K, and you can insert hyperlinks. That way you know exactly where you're purchasing things. I've lost, especially packaging. I'm like, where do I buy this specific thing from? So a link is very helpful there. The total cost. So if you're buying a bag of cherries and it comes in a 20-ounce quantity, be sure to log that because then that calculates your cost per kilogram, cost per gram. And this is a very important column. This is the column that the recipe sheet uses. And then I is cost per pound. And I use I primarily this column to differentiate pricing. So if I'm looking at two different cherries that I might buy, I would input both of them with their total amount of goods, the unit, and I would compare and contrast their cost per pound. This has been really helpful for me in like purchasing olive oil or different things where it's hard to compare apples to apples when they're different sizes. So I've already input a few things: cherries, flour, leaven, salt, seeds, water, whole wheat flour. For leaven, this is for sourdough specifically, I call that half of my cost of flour. So if flour is $5, leaven is $2.50 for the same amount of weight, since leaven is half water and half flour. That's how I've decided to cost leaven. Water, I've said, is as close to zero as possible. So 0.01 for 50 pounds. If you wanted to actually calculate your utility, you could. And then if you're adding other things in here like chickpeas, you would say, place of purchase, Costco, $12 for, let's call it 40. And then the drop down menu has all these different units. And this is pretty standard. So most of your stuff should come or have right on the packaging what they are. So I'm going to call it ounces. And then I'll probably also add butter. Why not? Costco, $12 for 4 pounds. And then it calculates it. You'll notice here it says make sure this column is sorted A to Z. So after you're done adding new items, it's really important to go right here and hit A through Z, and now it'll alphabetize them. The reason this is so important is because your other Excel sheet, the one where you create your recipes, uses a formula that needs to look at an alphabetized list. So always be sure to alphabetize and hit save. This other sheet here is constants. Don't edit these. These are conversions, and they help calculate these columns. So that is your cost of goods raw data sheet. From here, you can go to your baked goods recipe template. So as you can see, it's not pulling any info now. I'm going to show you how to set this up because once you download these files and put them onto your computer, you'll have to get everything linked. So let's say I'm going to call this sourdough A. a little tour of this sheet. So this is where you put the name of your recipe. This is where you would put your grams per loaf. So if your grams per loaf are 1,000, you can do 1,000. I've got a place for sandwiches and bowls and Pullmans, so I can look at the cost of each of those. You'll notice that there's this little green triangle at the top of some of these. We'll go over that in a little bit. This is telling you that there is a validation error, but we can fix that. So this row 7, is telling us the batch size. So batch size is looking at row 9. What's in here actually? Unhide. Let's see. Nothing. I'm going to delete that. Oh, I can't. I'm just going to hide it again. I don't know why that's there. Okay, so these rows, if you have a mixer with different quantities, like let's say 2, 4, 12, 20, and 25, you can do whatever you want. It has X because I like to say times this number. This is telling me how many loaves this load makes. And you'll notice it says 2,000. So it's taking 2 times this, and it gives you the batch size. 4 times this gives you the batch size. So if I change this to 850, my batch size changes depending on the number of loaves that I want to make. So we'll stick to 1,000 because that's really easy and easy to check. This area is where you place your ingredients. These columns are all calculated, so you shouldn't have to touch them, but I will explain that formula to you. So this is supposed to be a drop down. This is going to be pulling all of your costing data that we had just gone over. It's going to pull all of that into here, but you have to set that up. Whoops, wrong one. But we have to set that up. So in this column, cost of goods, this is our ingredients area. Now you can do this in one of 2 ways. You can use Power Query, which I like to use. I think it's a little more accurate, but both Power Query and this very easy linking situation both involve you keeping the name of your file the same, at least your cost of goods raw data file. So whenever you name this sheet, ensure that it stays that name all the time. Your most up-to-date version needs to stay that name or Excel sheet links break. Also, if you change its location, you will break the cell link, but I'll show you how to relink them in case you're organizing folders or something. So your first easiest option is to just link these sheets with a simple equal. So I would say equals ingredient. I would go to my cost of goods raw data, and I would go to ingredient, enter. And now it pulls butter. I'm going to go to my cost per grams column, B, and I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to go to cost of goods raw data. I'm going to hit my dollars per gram that corresponds with butter, enter. It pulls it. So now to get the rest of the data, I'm going to say, okay, the dollar signs lock you into column A and row 3, but I want my rows to change because I want to pull all the data, not just butter the whole time, and that's what it would do. So I hit enter there. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I want it to always pull column H, but not always row 3. So I deleted the $2 signs before the number, and now I'm going to go here and hit this double, see how it's a little cross? If you double click that, doesn't work. Anyway, if you just pull it down, it's going to pull all that info. The zeros mean you have nothing there. So I've got now all my cost of goods or my ingredients that I'm going to be using, and that is way number 1. Way number 2 is to go to data, queries, and connections. And I've already got a query set up for you here. So if you double click this query, data source could not locate. So what you will have to do is, this is going to be the same error that you get. You go to applied steps, hit the little settings thing here, this little gear. This is a file path. So if you go to browse, you go to wherever your cost of goods raw data sheet lives, you hit import and you hit OK. And then if you go down here, it's got all that info for you. So I'm going to hit save and close. And now I've got all my costing goods. And the way that you would update this, so let's say you've added, like, we can do it right now and show that it works. So let's say I also want to have rye flour, say local mill, and I'm going to call it $8.50 for 5 pounds. So I've got my new cost there. I'm going to alphabetize because I have to do that. I'm going to hit save. All right, so I've saved this cost of goods data. Now I'm going to go back to this sheet, and to pull this new data, it doesn't do it automatically. To pull this new info, I'm going to hit in Data, Queries and Connections. I'm going to hit this button or refresh all. So refresh all. And then look, rye flour was pulled very quickly. So that's how you pull that data into this sheet. Next, we can create our recipes. So this is supposed to be a drop-down link, and we need to relink those. So if you go to Home, you go to Data, Data Validation. So I hit Data Validation, and I want it to be a list, but it's not referencing the correct source. So I'm going to let it be equals, hit this, and now I'm going to go like that. And I'm going to go to 500 because as I add things to the sheet, I don't want to deal with this too much. So it's pulling this other tab, data from A2 through A500. Hit enter, apply these changes to all other cells with the same settings. That's going to make this whole sheet work for you. And then you hit OK. So now I've got a drop-down list of all of my ingredients. So I'm going to go down to water. I'm going to also do, these are some of the, like I get very detailed with my ingredients, and you will too, but I'm just going to make these a little more general. So this is flour. This is going to be my whole wheat flour. So pretty much I just look at my written recipe and I'm copying it into there. So my leaven next, salt. Let's do cherries, and let's do seeds. Okay, so now I've got, you see that all those triangles disappeared? The triangles here won't disappear unless I do ignore this error, which I did, and now I'm gonna probably hit save right now so that you can keep it that way. So when you get this recipe sheet, it'll look like this. All right, so now what you wanna do is change your percentages. So what I love about this, I'm gonna X out of this. What I love about this way of doing recipes is that whenever I'm mixing and I want to adjust things, we think in percentages. So I can go in here and say, you know what, that dough is a little too wet for this particular whole wheat flour I got this week. I'm going to go down to 77, and you'll see it changes everything for you. So the way this formula works, and you can look into here, I recommend not touching this if you can help it, and trust that I have correctly done this for you. And I'll show you how you can triple check that if you ever edit something, yours is correct as well. So you'll notice that I have, this is pretty much, ignoring flour because it is 100%, and that's what this 1 is. So that's why you see the purple box here and the red box. I'm ignoring flour because I've already accounted for it with this 1 in the formula. And if you look down, so it goes through all these, it pulls at the percentage of that item, it looks at the rest, and it gives you the grams that you would need for this item. So the way you can check this to be sure that this works is if you highlight all of the things in this group, all of your ingredients in this recipe, the total sum, which is down here, needs to equal the top batch size. So you'll see 2,000 grams, 2,000 grams. That means this formula works perfectly. And you can go down the row for all this, 4,000, 4,000, 12,000, 12,000. So this formula works. Let's say that you want to add an item. Let's say you want another inclusion. So you would go to Insert, and now you've created a new row where you can add an ingredient. So let's add, I guess let's just add butter. Makes no sense, but add butter. So you click butter, and now you have 0 all across this row because you need to add a percentage. Let's say I want to do 5% butter. I've now changed the entire recipe to account for the fact that we now have 5% butter in this recipe. I'm going to check 2,000, 2,000, and it works. And the same thing kind of applies, like if you double click this, it's still doing the same exact thing. It's grabbing all of that info, and it's ignoring the flour because we're accounting for it with this 1. So everything is still working. The only thing that's not currently working is the cost of goods. So we got to get this going. So what this is doing is this is using the VLOOKUP formula. It's saying if A10 equals nothing, then put nothing here. If it equals something, which it does, it has 77, look up this ingredient in B10, which is water. The reference, this is the table array. So we need to relink this table array. So I'm going to hit backspace, get rid of this hashtag reference, and I'm going to link my table array in this cost of goods sheet. I'm actually going to do this to 500 also. And you'll notice it doesn't have the dollar signs, but I'm going to add those. And this is important because you might miss ingredients if you don't hit these dollar signs. So add a dollar sign before the letter and the number to lock in those columns and rows. So I've just given it a table to reference. The column index number is 2. It's going to pull that for you. Whoops. It's going to pull the second column, and then it's going to multiply it times your ingredients in column C. And that's going to give you your cost per gram. So I'm going to hit that little, I'm going to pull this all the way down to here. This is our total. So I'm going to highlight that. This is the total cost for this batch. So it's, again, it's saying I'm looking up VLOOKUP B10, this ingredient. I'm looking in my cost of goods worksheet in this table array, which we've referenced as A2 through B500. You could literally put this exact thing into your formula. If you didn't want to click around, you can just copy, including those little, what are those, kind of air quotes. You could put that right in. It's looking at the second column, and it's multiplying it by the number of grams. So now we know that this times 2 batch costs $6.39. Up here, it tells you the cost per item. So it takes the total grams of your individual boule, multiplies it by the total cost of the batch, and divides it by your batch cost, and that gives you the cost per item. So you'll notice if I change this to $8.50, my cost goes down. So this is all working. This is how you want it to be. Oops. And that is how you use this baked goods costing template. Okay, so now that you have done your bread, you can go and log it. So this is our product cost of goods, and this is optional. You don't have to do this, but this is really helpful if you want to see how much profit you're harvesting from a single good. And it's a good way to kind of get averages and see like, oh, what's kind of my average profit margin. So I'm going to call this sourdough A. This should be black. Save. All right, so my cost of goods, this is another link. So you're going to hit equal. You're going to go to this. Oops. You're going to go to the one that we just worked on, and you're going to hit the cost of goods for whatever you're selling. So I'm going to hit 320, enter. So it's going to try to pull that same thing. Just hit Control Z, and it'll leave it to just that one. So now here I can say, what do I want to charge for sourdough A? Let's say I want to charge $8. Well, this is broken. Anyway, so I will fix it, and you can see how we fix it. So if item equals something, which is, if item equals nothing, which is what the double quotations means, then nothing. If it equals something, then we're going to have it calculate a profit margin. And profit margin is charge minus, I'm backspacing that hashtag reference exclamation, minus my cost of goods, divided by my charge, enter. So it's currently doing that, but I'm about to fix it, so it should work for you because I'm going to hit save. And your profit margin here is 60%. And I've just pulled that formula down. So now it should always work. Let's see what's going on here. Inconsistent calculated error, that's fine. Let's say I want to name this SKU 001. I'm going to make this a text So I can call it what I want. And then if you have any notes, you can do that. So that is kind of how this is used. And then you can say, sourdough B, and you could link it to a second type, and you can do some comparisons. And notice if I change it to 9, I can see my profit margin going up. If you like to use things by type, I have categories like bread and spreads and kits. This is just to help you kind of alphabetize it. So this is how you use your product cost of goods sheet. And the last thing I'll show you how to do is if you're doing new versions. So back to this baked goods costing template. So always have a baked goods costing template for yourself. But now that I've created sourdough A, I'm going to hit File, Save As, and I'm going to call this sourdough A. So each time you create a new recipe, I highly recommend creating a whole new workbook for it and naming it whatever it is. That way you can pull up individual recipes. You can also create new versions and not lose anything. I used to have one giant Excel workbook, and I would have all my recipes and all these different worksheets. It was miserable because I would change percentages and I would never kind of keep track of that. So let's say you've done sourdough A and you're like, you know what? I think I'm ready to change this, but there's something good about sourdough A. I don't want to lose that info. You go to this tab, you hit move or copy, create a copy. And now I've got sourdough 2. I'm going to call this sourdough V2. And then I'm going to name this sourdough A V2. And so now I can say, you know what? I'm going to make this a 50-50 flour and whole wheat. And I'm going to save that now. So I've saved sourdough A. I have both versions so I can compare and contrast what I've changed. And I'm going to log that and see what my difference is. So I'm going to call this bread sourdough A V2 equals. I have to make sure I'm in the right recipe tab, and I'm going to hit this. So $3.40. Let's say I charge $10 for that. So my cost of goods has gone up from the last one, and I would need to maybe charge more if I want to make the same profit margin. And I can call this 002. And you have your own SKU conventions. But anyway, that's kind of how this sheet works. And it's been super handy for me. I really have enjoyed seeing all this data. And I hope that this has been my favorite piece. It makes recipe creation way more fun because I can see it's easy, first of all, which is fun. And then I also know how each individual product affects my cost of goods. So I'm not like, cherries have gone up and I really don't know what's happening here. I get full insight into it. And I hope that this works for you too. All right. I'm going to stop this one and I'll do the contractor in a next sheet just in case you're not as interested in that.